I played Honest Hearts first because of the recommended levels, so I was about level 15 when I volunteered to assist the caravan in re-establishing contact with New Canaan. This New Vegas expansion appears to have received mixed reaction from the Fallout community, many claiming that it's boring fetch quests cobbled together with insensitive white savior themes, and the most interesting bits found in the lore rather than what we participate in. Others suggest that the community as a whole overlooked the deeper meanings, and that this story genuinely engages with historical parallels and contemporary religion. Either way, I lean towards the latter side, and I wanted to offer my thoughts, as these topics are still quite relevant. But before we get into the details, let's do a quick recap. We get a history lesson about New Canaan, a powerful Mormon city in the north with strong defense capabilities that holds control and influence over the majority of trade routes north of the Mojave. But it was actually destroyed by the Whitelegs, a war tribe led by Ulysses and spurred on by Caesar. Most of the Canaanites who survived the initial onslaught have dispersed, but many settled here in Zion Canyon. Joshua, Graham, and Daniel, two New Canaan Mormon men, now reside among the Dead Horses and Sorrow's tribes. Due to the fact that they were absent when their home was destroyed, they're suffering horribly of guilt. As a result, they vigorously spread their faith while assisting their new tribes in defending against further Whitelegs attacks. We'll provide these important players more context later. But that's about where we come in. In transit, we get ambushed by Whitelegs when we arrive, and all the chatting I did getting to know these guys is tossed.
The job is simple.
Ah! Damn it, ambush!
Oh wow, that's life. Also, I f***ing love this ambush scene.
I don't deserve this.
Might as well be waving at him.
Holy shit! Stay low, people, stay low!
We're intercepted by a nice native tribal, Follows Chalk, who takes us to Joshua Graham, the fabled leader of the Dead Horses tribe. It's here where Zion is first mentioned, with religious connotations sprinkled throughout our dialogue, which becomes important to the themes.
You can't expect God to do all the work.
As a side note, he was actually waiting for Ulysses, the courier of the Lonely Road DLC, the same Ulysses that led the Whitelegs attack on New Canaan, and whom he suspected would try to kill him to finish the job. But he'll have to settle for us instead. Joshua Graham points us to Daniel, the other Canaanite, to help with navigation and pre-war instruments. Apparently it's taboo for the locals to enter certain regions, and we can't find our way out of the canyon without their help.
Dead horses and sorrows mark them on taboo places. Places from back when.
Collecting these items for both sides is the criticized fetch quests that most players loathe, but they do serve the benefit of taking us to almost every location in Zion. We also have a choice of two guides, which many have said are the worst followers and inferior to those back home. During our journey, we'll have engagements against the Whitelegs as they fight to eliminate the remaining tribes. We'll have more discussions with Daniel and Joshua Graham, and then our role in the story directs the futures of the tribes. It's through these interactions with these key players is where we'll explore the themes of Honest Hearts. Daniel is a Mormon Christian who was dispatched to Zion as a missionary of New Canaan to lead the willing toward the way of God. He frequently assisted the Sorrows with various medical issues and routine struggles. Therefore, he was absent when New Canaan was destroyed, so Daniel's attention shifted to taking care of the tribal people as a result. In the end, this endeavor positions him as the leader, and he promotes peace via escaping the Whitelegs to the east. Joshua Graham's history is more illustrious. There's a lot to talk about, so I'll paraphrase. He was a Mormon who left New Canaan and was captured by other tribals. It is here that he meets the future Caesar. Future Caesar and Joshua Graham gain favor and rank by instructing and training their captors. This creates the ability to conquer neighboring tribes and eventually amass, recruit, or enslave a force large enough to lead greater conquests, which would bring them out of the valley and into conflict with the NCR. Joshua Graham, who has some success co-founding the Legion and serving as Caesar's legate, ultimately fails to capture Hoover Dam. He's burned alive and thrown into the canyon as a warning to others that Caesar will not tolerate failure. He survives and returns to the canyon tribes, who welcome him back. So Graham assumes the position of acting war chief among the Dead Horses. Caesar is a man with a rich history too, but he's not the focus here. The only thing important to know is that since learning of Joshua Graham's survival, he tasked the Whitelegs to eliminate the remaining New Canaanites. Ulysses was sent by Caesar to train and lead the Whitelegs in the destruction of New Canaan. They used organized shock and awe tactics, never before seen employed by the tribals, slaughtering all without mercy. He later comes to lament the influence he's had over the tribe. After the sacking of the city, he finishes his obligations to Caesar and sets off on his own. The influence of the merciless violence continues with the Whitelegs leader, salt upon wounds. Therefore, the Whitelegs continue conflict with the tribes settled in the canyon. They've never learned to subsist without raiding and pillaging, which is crucial to understanding that this is now their way of life. If they succeed in exterminating the Canaanites and all traces of Joshua Graham, Caesar will assimilate them into the legion. So with the key players established, let's move on to what it all means. The themes are reflected by the contrasting characters of Joshua Graham and Daniel. Joshua Graham's themes are redemption and reconciliation. For Joshua Graham, he's reached a realization that family, or tribe per se, is all there is. His former tribe destroyed by Caesar, seeking only Graham's death. With that, he had two options: reconcile the past, or fight against it. In fighting, it becomes about revenge. If he cannot reconcile his guilt or being responsible for the death of his nation, he could be leading his new tribe to their own. If he can't let go of the past or come to terms with the things he has done, he'll forever be tormented and will never find peace. As a result of his commitment to a vicious and roving army of reconditioned tribals, he transformed into a ruthless monster. He was forced to reflect on his life after he was abandoned by Caesar and left to die. The fallen legate accepted sole responsibility and set out to make amends to the people and deity he had ignored 3 decades earlier. Reconnecting with his religious heritage, he wonders to himself, can he achieve salvation if he leads these people to peace? Or is he doomed to eternal suffering in hellfire? If that's the case, what would compel him to do right? And what would be the point?
I don't enjoy killing, but when done righteously, it's just a chore, like any other.
Daniel's theme is identity and heritage. He has a history of witnessing other tribes suffer and perish at the hands of slavers, raiders, and exploitative prospectors. Thus, he has dedicated himself to protecting and preserving the Sorrows. He intends to accomplish this by helping the Sorrows evacuate Zion to the east out of a desire to both remove them from harm's way and prevent them from falling into militancy to defeat the Whitelegs. Nevertheless, if the Whitelegs force his hand, Daniel will shed blood to prevent the Sorrows' demise. He has legitimate fears that war with the Whitelegs would change the Sorrows into a more warlike culture, as evidenced by Ulysses' influence on the Whitelegs. As such, he continues to preach the gospel. Over time, Daniel's preaching mixes with the Sorrows' spiritual heritage.
Find ghost of she, lay ghost to rest.
Thus, the Sorrows' father in the cave and the Mormon god become one and the same. This is a message of identity loss. After a few generations, it stands to reason that the Sorrows' culture and historical identity will be forever changed if they continue absorbing these new sermons and religious practices.
His holy bride and holy son were given unto the world to save it.
They probably also think Mary is the mother and Jesus is the child. No wonder they picked up on things so easily.
On that note, let's take a brief aside to learn about the Father in the Cave, an entity whom we're not allowed to seek out. But, we're not part of the tribe, so we don't have to follow their silly rules. This also touches on some of the rich, detailed history that many players enjoyed, so it's worth digging into if you're interested. But again, I'll paraphrase for the relevant bits. There's a long history with a man named Clark. He lost his family in the nukes, survived and warred his way to a second family, whom he also lost to childbirth. Depressed and alone, he attempted, but couldn't commit, suicide, but subsequently finds renewed purpose. The cave he inhabited was found by local children, but he used his military training to remain undetected. As he covertly listened and learned of these frequent visitors, he'd leave notes of advice and teachings and recommended them to settle in Zion, a piece of land to make up for all their misfortunes. He told them to be kind, but sleep with a knife. He became the mythical figure, the Father in the Cave. In a way, Clark adopts the tribal children the same way Joshua and Daniel their tribes, which capitalizes on the nature of family, both trying so desperately to rekindle their own sense of purpose. And in doing so, it broaches ethical dilemmas. Are Daniel and Joshua right in forcing their faith and influence upon the tribes? They believe they are. But even at the cost of wiping away the tribe's history and values? The coveted land of Zion harbors important holy sites like the cave itself, so important that the Sorrows have deemed worth dying over. Obviously, these sites can't be relocated, so to leave them behind can be instrumental in erasing it from the culture of future generations.
We cannot protect stone and water and a piece of sky. We have to hold on to our faith.
The cave probably doesn't mean much to Daniel, and that the mythical voices there were the ramblings of an old man in a cave. Islam, anyone? But it's also hard to say whether he knows better, since he so readily dismisses the Sorrow's beliefs, despite his beliefs hinging on similar premises.
He's some spirit the Sorrows used to believe in, watched over them from the caves in the valley.
Additionally, it's a statement on the issue of imposing missionary work on tribes who are inexperienced with it, and how they can misinterpret Graham's and Daniel's Christianity, and where the gaps between those beliefs are.
I think as more of them learn the teachings of the new Canaanites, they'll lose their old superstitions.
Our moral consistency is challenged by a young tribal named Follows Chalk, likely the first peaceful tribal we'll meet. He's struggling with the dilemma about seeing the outside world beyond the valley, but he realizes that it could affect how his own will handle his exploration of the taboo. Our input weighs heavily on his decision. Should we compel him to stay with his people? By participating in this decision, we're exercising similar influence as the two leaders. So then we ask again, just as we asked Graham and Daniel, is that our right? If he travels, he discovers that the world functions in many different ways. Perhaps he doesn't answer all his questions, but there's opportunities to explore. He becomes disillusioned of the dogmatic trappings and woeful ignorance of his tribe. So he's shunned, which is a terrible truth for people that look beyond the scope of their installed limited perspectives. Eventually, Follows Chalk is forced to set off alone and vanishes without a trace. If he stays, he's part of his tribe, but often wonders about the world at large. But he continues to support his family and Dead Horse Point, and eventually comes to accept the spiritual confines of all his culture knows. They have it all figured out, and to seek anything more is taboo. His mind is closed, and he may be content, but is he better for it? If you're enjoying this video, consider subscribing and chat with me below. I read all my comments, even the shitty ones. You fucking f***ers. Eat my There's more New Vegas DLC content in the works, so if you want to see those videos too, you'll be notified when they release. And don't forget to check out my prior Fallout content. But let's get back. I instinctively knew who I sided with more, but I didn't really understand the deeper concepts until I learned more about the history and lore, including Ulysses' role and Caesar's involvement. Though I have to disagree with some of you when you say that Honest Hearts just is not good. Though I can kind of understand where you're coming from. From the perspective of characters and lore, it is quite good. It's fascinating because it demonstrates how areas spared from direct nuclear contact are nevertheless vulnerable to the post-detonation calamities they bring, while providing an unusual context in which to test our moral convictions.
Don't listen to this thing. His cries are those of a mad beast caught in a thicket. He gave no mercy to my family, and I will give none to his.
In my playthrough, I was unable to prevent Joshua Graham from killing Salt Upon Wounds, so the Whitelegs continued to pursue the new Canaanites despite the loss of their leader, until they were eventually vanquished by more organized and disciplined tribes. Sorrow's culture did change more warlike, and joined Joshua Graham in eliminating the Whitelegs' threat. Dead Horses emphasized their warlike nature, which led to conflict and tension, even to previously friendly tribes. Joshua Graham continued to lead the tribals in militancy, but didn't revel in the brutality as he used to. Instead, a more measured approach to war. Daniel still tried to minister to the people, but his missionary peaceful influence failed to take, so he sets off back home.
Tribals are smart, but, well, they're ignorant.
Philosophically, I sided with Joshua Graham. I sympathize more with the ideas of having your own tribe rather than any sense of nation. If you want to benefit from participating in society with your tribe, you must play by certain rules that benefit the collective. And if you slip up, there should be ways to redeem yourself in the eyes of said society. If there is no path to redemption for people or tribes that are lost, then there's no reason to contribute. And it's better to have contribution rather than retaliation. And through enough redemptive acts comes reconciliation. This would be the salvation that Joshua Graham seeks. It's just not motivated by way of mysticism. Inversely, Daniel's inspiration is from the same source, meaning that somewhere is an inconsistency with their context. When left unchecked, these inconsistencies could end up causing more harm than good.
I am the right hand of the Lord, and the instrument of his vengeance.
We all understand the necessity of a system of reason to help deal with the dangers of the Wastes. If it isn't the Whitelegs, then it'll be some other threat. It's almost a guarantee. To me, it's about personal liberties. The social contract being an agreement among the tribes for enjoying personal liberties and freedoms without violating the liberties of others. If one tribe is restricting another's, they must decide if the trade-offs are worth it. In this case, it's death.
For our valley, something to be done.
Therefore, I thought the tribe should aggressively defend themselves. So even though war should be a last resort, being defensible is a fact of life in this new world, as much as the old. The dead horses are already on board, it's the sorrows who need to learn to fight. You might say this is Daniel's position. Daniel claims self-defense as a last resort as well. Thus, he intends to flee rather than fight. But being forced to move through threat of death is an egregious violation of personal liberty. Therefore, it bears to reason the aggressor's life is also forfeit. I also think Daniel is a bit too idealistic and hypocritical in his preaching.
Letting go of a taboo is difficult for them.
He claims that it's better to flee their homeland than to inflict death on those opposed. He doesn't want to risk influencing their culture for the worse. That is, worse from his perspective. But in doing so, he is influencing them nonetheless. He claims the sorrows shouldn't be pushed into a decision, yet he makes the decision.
I've already explained to them that we're leaving. They've accepted it.
As for the themes of identity being challenged by religious influence, I think it's natural. If the dead horses wish to adopt militancy, so be it. If the sorrows want to listen or adopt the religion, that's fine too. I'm of the mindset that if their cultures can't withstand external influence, then it's not a strong culture to begin with. My indignation arises when benefits are being gatekept. Like, we're not going to help you unless you convert or donate to our tribe, and so on. Requirements like this are far more suspect. As for heritage, personally, I don't care much about this stuff either, nor about sacred sites, just personal liberties within the confines of a societal contract.
We all go through periods of darkness. In such times, we can turn to the Lord. But it's good to have friends.
The fact that we can contemplate these questions speaks to the depth of the stories. Sure, there could be a number of shortcomings in the quest design and the on-the-nose tribal depictions, but looking beyond that, as we did here, it doesn't need to distract from the message. And for what it's worth, I believe they succeeded in illustrating the deeper themes despite the drawbacks. Though, I do wonder if they could have involved us earlier, considering it feels like we're coming in at the end of the story. Much of the most interesting bits left to the lore. I'm at least content in learning that it's not as shallow as initially rumored. And while it's not my favorite of the DLCs, Honest Hearts isn't nearly as flawed as some dogmas would have you believe.
I guess it just goes to show how difficult it is to communicate sometimes.
Make no mistake about why we are here. This is an extermination.